All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We'll have a few more come in as we go. But in interest of time, we'll go ahead and get going. So thank you everyone for joining us for the next Spatial Solutions webinar, sponsored by Paratum Solutions. I'm excited for the one we have today. We're going to be talking about ArcGIS Indoors, and Jeff Ulricksen is going to join us to talk about their journey on migrating legacy space systems to ArcGIS Indoors. Before we get going on that a little bit, so Jeff, you want to do a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Jeff Ulricksen. I'm the Assistant Director of Spatial Services at the University of Rhode Island. And in that role, I am responsible for two things: our current legacy space system, which is INSITE, and I'm also working to implement GIS operationally across the university. So that is the role Spatial Services is seeking to fill at the University of Rhode Island. And we'll talk about how those two are merging as we go forward with the presentation.
Perfect. And I'm Chris Akin. I'm president of Paratum Solutions. And before I forget, feel free to ask questions as we go in the chat. That'll come to myself and Jeff directly to the host. We'll address those probably towards the end, kind of en masse. But feel free to ask questions along the way, and we'll make sure we address those. So a little bit about Paratum. So we are focused on geospatial consulting and implementation. So working with organizations to think about their strategy, their GIS needs, how to grow that, whether that's utilities or floor plans, data conversion, staff augmentation. So kind of a broad need off of that. And the term Paratum comes from the Latin prepared, and that's one of our big ethos is a majority loss is preventable. So what can we do to be prepared on things? We have done quite a lot of work in the campus arena with GIS, supporting them. University of Rhode Island is one of our latest that we were engaged with, but the experience we've had is pretty broad on the campus arena. But that also encompasses not only higher ed and K through 12, healthcare, but also the same concepts involved with government, utility districts, and so on. So if you're thinking about assets and facility management, that's where we can really help and shine. And again, specifically on the campus arena, from the GIS standpoint, GIS plays a huge role in a lot of different aspects on a campus, whether that's utilities, floor plans, campus safety and security, property and real estate management, but also, again, this broadens to any, campus is a very broad term. Anybody who's managing a large areas, and you're doing asset management or planning or master planning efforts, there's a large effort with that. And the fact of being able to take this onto centralizing all your data and taking it to mobile devices and sharing that with your team and making that data centralized, shareable, and accessible, that's the key to GIS for these organizations. So very high level, ArcGIS Indoors, we want to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page on that. ArcGIS Indoors is the latest, one of the latest products by Esri. Esri, if you're not familiar with them, they are the 800-pound gorilla in the GIS software world. ArcGIS Indoors has a lot of functionality regarding basically making very smart workplaces and facilities. Some of the very high level aspects is the routing capability, not only location to location, but when you start getting inside a building, room to room navigation, start having the blue dot tracking of where people are walking or moving, start tracking those through Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connections. That can also be expanded to inventory and asset control. And then you're going to see kind of Jeff's conversation revolving around managing of those spaces, using Arc Indoors to start capturing what is how those spaces are being utilized, how you can start planning for those in the future. And before we move forward, I want to do a quick poll. Make sure I can do this. I'm going to launch this poll. Can you see that, Jeff?
Yep.
All right, so there's two questions here. If you can answer both of them. So where are you on, where is your organization on its GIS journey? And then the second question is, how familiar are you with ArcGIS Indoors? And we want that, this gives us kind of a good baseline so we can talk to where everybody's needs are in these conversations. Whether you're just starting on your GIS or kind of learning what it is, and or you're pretty advanced on that. And the same goes with ArcGIS Indoors. If you're just in that learning and data gathering phase, you're starting to have discussions or doing a pilot and or maybe even further along and fully implemented. So we can take a minute to answer that. Okay. A few more. Looks like we've kind of leveled out. So I'm going to end that poll. So let's share that. Can you see the results?
Yep.
I can't always tell what other people see, so appreciate it. So on the GIS journey, sounds like we have kind of a wide range here, but about a third of them have some basic GIS functionality or are heavily in use. So that's over half or a little further along. But even that, the basic GIS functionality is kind of getting started with a few applications and all. So it sounds like we have some good middle tier, some very advanced users out there as well. But then again, still some people learning what it is or kind of getting started with it. And then as far as indoors, this one's a little more skewed to the early stages of things, which makes sense given that this is still kind of a young product, still getting a lot of traction out there. So we'll speak a little bit more, and I think this is where Jeff's conversation really shines, is discussing the early stages and how he got internal conversations going and getting that pilot project off the ground. So I think we're in good shape off of that. So off of that, I will pass it to Jeff, and he will take it from here for a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, to get started, let's fill you in just a little bit about URI. Our current space system, some of you may have heard of, some may have not. It's called INSITE. We use their NetFM Oracle database and their Visual FM floor plan editor. For those of you that aren't familiar with INSITE, they've been around since the late 70s. For those of you very familiar with the FECA manual, you'll notice the cover of the FECA manual. There's a gentleman listed as chair of the committee by the name of Creon Syros. Creon was the chair of INSITE and really literally wrote the book on the FECA manual, and somebody I learned a great deal from in terms of space management. By the numbers, I gave you a few stats here about URI. So we have 4 campuses. Our maintained acres are right around 4,000. If we start looking at unmaintained acreage, it grows substantially. We have just over 300 buildings, 700 plus floors, almost 20,000 spaces. Our gross square footage is just over 6 million. And you can see some of our stats on our net usable and net assignable as well. Let's see, controls. You're going to work for me? There we go. These are just a couple of snapshots of our campus, new GIS campus space map. It's available in Esri's Living Atlas. We publish this through Community Maps, and I just share that so that you are aware. You can go poke around and learn a little bit more about our campuses if you're interested. Okay, so our legacy space system, as I mentioned, we had INSITE NetFM. That's an Oracle database. It uses a web-based interface to query the data, and you get the results returned in tabular format. It does have a space survey functionality so that we can assign users across campus surveys to complete to collect space data. It is the system of record for our current building spatial data, site, facility, floor, space, and attributes. We track office occupants. We track laboratory assignments. We also use this system right now to keep track of the location and basic accounting information for our movable asset inventory. So that would include lab equipment. That would include office equipment, vehicles, anything that with a value of greater than $5,000. And you can see from these screenshots I provided from that system where it's really kind of an old school interface and, you know, click the button, edit the record. And one of the things that's frustrating for me as an everyday user of this system is the number of clicks it takes, not only to get the results you want to see or edit, but then the number of clicks involved with editing. So speeding up workflows is something I'm really looking forward to working on with ArcGIS Indoors. Let's see. They also provided a graphical floor plan editor. And this is really, Chris knows this well. He and I have been working with some of this data for a while. This is my Achilles heel at the moment in my transition and what I've been doing with Indoors so far. Visual FM is CAD-like, but it is not CAD. It is INSITE's proprietary floor plan editing software, and it contains some data as well in the form of what we call our space label, and that includes the floor and room number, the department allocation, the room type from the FICA manual, the square footage, and if there is a door tag that's different than the room number, what that door tag information is. And that door tag field is really going to be key to some of the things I'm going to show and talk about here in a minute. What's interesting about this system is whether you make an edit in the Oracle database or an edit in the floor plans, you have to make sure the two pieces are reconciled at the end of the process. So the final step in any floor plan edit is to hit the reconcile button and make sure that any data, basic data captured within the floor plan matches what's within the database. So that is an extra step in a workflow that is slow and frustrating to manage, but part of the process. So why ArcGIS Indoors? Why are we looking to move on from INSITE? Well, first and foremost, I will say this. I was looking at Indoors personally as a potential replacement for INSITE, but I was very early in those stages. I was talking to my direct supervisor about it. We were talking about what such a project might look like, what kind of process we would go through, what it would take to do that. And then unexpectedly, the INSITE company announced they were going out of business, which greatly sped up our timetable for having them go in this direction. So those of you that have legacy CAFM systems, you know they aren't built for visualizing and sharing data. You really have to know the ins and outs of the system. And what I found was that me and the one other person on my staff, when decision makers needed information, they couldn't get it themselves in an easy way that was clear, easy to understand, easy to share. And we were spending as much time doing data dumps, building Power BI reports, building graphs, visualizing the data so that they could have it for their presentations, their meetings, their decision making. It was a challenge to provide access to the data. And even though we could easily create an account for somebody, it was the kind of system where if you're not in it every day, it's not intuitive. And we found that even though we would grant access, people wouldn't use it. So we were looking for a system that made it easier to retrieve, visualize, and analyze data. And as I was diving into the GIS world and using GIS to map the campus and use outdoor space tracking and asset tracking, it only made sense to look at merging our indoor space needs with our outdoor space needs into one system. And with the indoor solution, it gives you that ability. So here I am working on implementing this great, in my opinion, great system that will help me track my space inventory, but at the same time, provide a lot of great service to the campus community. It provides a much more intuitive graphic interface that's available across desktop, mobile, and even kiosk applications. And it's helping me prepare for the future in the sense that it's already 3D ready. So as our school, our university starts to look at Revit models, BIM models, using LiDAR data, I'm going to have a system that's capable of handling that. And that is what I'm most excited for, is that I'm really setting the campus and our organization up for future uses. So the problem was where to begin. How do I get started? And, you know, Chris, I'll let you jump in at some point on this slide too, but for those of you familiar with the pricing model, and Chris, do you want to just take a minute and talk about the pricing model for Indoors?
Sure. So this is very specific to the higher education sector. So kind of want to throw that clause in there. Higher education has a great package for their GIS program as a whole. from Esri, so they can have an educational site license. Allows an administrative and an academic instances, two different instances. And through that administrative side of it, there is the add-on capability for several ArcGIS Pro extensions. And the very basic one, and it's the only one that we've listed here, is just the ArcGIS Pro extension, the Indoors extension to sit on top of ArcGIS Pro that allows the data manipulation of the floor plan information to get it ready for Indoors. There are several other kind of layers you can add on top of that to allow you to start utilizing it to start doing the space management. But from a cost of entry standpoint, especially the higher education side, the extension is only $1,000 per year to get going on that. So you can start doing a lot of data manipulation, start doing your publishing, and do that proof of concept for a low barrier of entry.
Thanks, Chris. And so to add on there, when I looked at the value for $1,000, it was affordable without having to really put a major crunch on budgets. And it was something where I could get started with putting together proof of concept of this system without having to get rid of the old system right away. So it allowed me to run two systems concurrently at a very reasonable cost and start working through some of the data migration and setting it up and having a proof of concept. So that is what really sold us on the ability to go down this road was, hey, we can check this out in GIS, see how our data fits into it, see how we're going to be able to use it, even if it's only one or two buildings, to get a sense of what's going to be involved here and if this is something we want to pursue. And even if it didn't work, we're talking about a one-time purchase of $1,000. We felt that was a safe risk to evaluate this. And how many systems are out there where at a low-cost risk like this, you can actually implement and try out without selling out your budget for future years? So it really gave me an affordable way to provide proof of concept and have something I could show my leadership when we were trying to make a final decision on which way to go.
Jeff, I'll hop in here real quick too. And
Yep.
this is, from the pricing standpoint, this was a huge change for Esri. Indoors has been out for a few years now, but when it first came out and it went through several iterations of pricing, it was originally on a price per square foot. And I think the original price was 11 cents a square foot, and it got down to 9, 8, 7 cents a square foot. But when you start doing the math on what that was a fortune. And I don't think that really was a big deterrent for people. So this is a major step forward on the new pricing model to be able to get this into an institution at a very low cost, and it's not like it grows substantially after that, which is really nice. So Esri's really rethought that pricing model as a great benefit.
And I will say that I now have my full license in place. So at the end, when we're taking questions, I'm happy to talk about what the full license ended up costing me and will be annually for me. Okay, come on. All right. Whoops. Sorry. Went back too many. So what does this pilot project enable you to do? Well, as I mentioned earlier, now I'm able to run concurrently with my legacy system. So I can keep my production going, but I can experiment with the direction we think we want to head and secure buy-in for that change. It also very important, it helped me evaluate the state of my data. And when I say the state of my data, I'm talking twofold here. I'm talking the tabular data I have in my Oracle database, along with the quality of my CAD data or floor plan data. And it's really two components there. I was in very good shape, in my opinion, with my tabular data, but my CAD data, because we were running a non-CAD system, we had a lot of work to do there. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it really helps you understand how ready you are for the transition. The other thing, and I will say this, I'm in a unique position. I consider myself very lucky because I am responsible for both space at the university and GIS. I've talked to a number of groups, other potential users, people interested in this, and GIS and space don't always go hand in hand in the same department or even have a good working relationship together. Doing this sort of pilot project, if that's the situation you're in, it's a great way to start forming a collaboration between your GIS staff and your space staff. Because what I've found as I've talked to people is the space staff may not understand GIS or how they can put it to use. And the GIS people don't necessarily understand the needs of the space staff and what needs to go into a space inventory. What is the FECA manual? How do you use it and apply it? What other needs do you have? So getting those two groups together and working on this early collaboration helps them both understand each other's needs, capabilities, and how you can make the system work for everybody. And lastly, I worked through a number of challenges during my pilot project. I know I still am facing some challenges that I haven't even thought of yet, but Chris and I would get together during our one-on-ones working on this pilot project together, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm on iteration 9 of the pilot project. I think I ended up doing it 10 different times because what I found was I'd get so far and then I'd notice a hiccup. And rather than fix it in the current project, I'd start over from scratch again, and it helped me reinforce the skills I needed to get my project up and running, but work through processes. So if I go back into my folders, I've got, I believe I'm up to 10 different versions of my original pilot project, and each version was working through a new stumbling block that I faced. And being able to go back and look at what went wrong or what were the results I wasn't happy with in the earlier version was very helpful. Anything you want to add there, Chris?
No, I guess the only thing is that's pretty typical. That's standard, is especially when you're doing a pilot or you're new on an endeavor. I would say before you can think about automating it, you got to figure out your process. And to do your process, you have to start very small, very targeted, and stub your toe several times. And that's exactly what we did here.
And I will add that, Chris and I set up an agreement from the beginning. I didn't want Chris to necessarily do the work for me. He was my guide. He did a lot of research for me. He pointed me to a lot of documentation that I hadn't seen, a lot of help videos I hadn't seen, would give me advice as how to approach different problems I had. But I wanted to do the work because ultimately, when I do my full-blown implementation, which I'm in the middle of now, it's going to be my system. And I need to understand it from the very first steps to the very last steps. And this pilot and working with Chris in that manner has informed me, and I'm in a much better place knowledge-wise because of it. So I do really recommend getting your hands dirty and doing some of the work yourself if you're looking to head down this road. So that kind of dovetails into this is, where do you get help? So obviously I had Chris. Chris was a huge help throughout this project. We just talked about how we work together on this. There's tons of online documentation, and not just Esri. There's web training and tutorials and YouTube videos across the board from GIS professionals and different groups. Esri obviously is always a great resource. Other users, finding people like myself that were going through this and having conversations with them. And it's just the point that indoors is becoming of such an interesting topic that knowledge about indoors and people's capabilities to work with it, they're expanding very quickly. And every time you turn around, you're finding somebody else that's applying it, maybe in a unique or different way, that can help inform you and help you make better decisions as you're planning your implementation. So what were the benefits of the pilot project? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I ended up with a repeatable process where I could work through challenges. I had the ability to experiment with lots of advanced features, and I actually have a screenshot here on the left of where I started playing with their 3D extraction tools. So this floor plan you're looking at is based on a 2D floor plan, but using some various settings and setting up a scene I was able to display it in a 3D manner. This has been very eye-opening for a lot of the decision makers and people above me here at the University of Rhode Island. They love when they see things in 3D. It was very easy to demonstrate for people. I could show them how it was going to work, what it was going to look like, what types of things we could do with it. I've even started with my original pilot data, collecting some data in the field, in the buildings using field maps. So we've even been able to work through some of the data collection issues for when the system is fully engaged. And ultimately, it helps generate buy-in and organizational support when you're looking for the resources to get this done. Whoops, my clicking isn't working well. What were some of the trade-offs I discovered as I went through this process? Well, I will tell you that first and foremost, we are an ArcGIS enterprise institution. And when we started down this road, you don't have to worry about your environment if you're working on a single ArcPro extension, just doing proof of concept. But we figured out pretty quickly that this was the road we were going to head, and we needed to start planning for a full-blown implementation. The first thing we looked at was, could our enterprise environment handle indoors? Was it indoors ready? Turns out we weren't. At the time we were evaluating this, we were on enterprise, I want to say 10.2. You need to be on 11.1 minimum to be ready for a full-blown indoors implementation. Our enterprise instance also existed on a set of old physical servers in a building here on campus that were really reaching end of life, needed to be updated, certainly weren't ready for an upgrade of the enterprise instance. So we made the decision to work with our centralized IT staff to spin up Amazon Web Services. And now our ArcGIS Enterprise is fully in the cloud, fully scalable, running on Windows. Our SQL is running on Windows Servers 2022. We are on the cutting edge for ArcGIS Enterprise. The work we did to get ready for indoors has been interesting because it's also benefiting us in other areas. We have our utilities group working to implement Esri's utility network. Now our enterprise instance is ready for that as well. So getting ready for indoors can have benefits in other areas of your GIS program. I had to think a lot about how I was going to manage the FECM uses for those of you that are familiar with space, because very often, these developed space systems like INSITE, ArcGIS, others, they come ready to go to manage FECM data. Indoors hasn't really reached that level yet where they have a prepared solution for managing the FECM uses. Obviously, if you're a GIS professional, it can handle any kind of data. But sometimes the space people look at what Esri's offering and go, well, how do we handle managing FECM? How do we do a space survey? The tools and capabilities are there. You need the GIS professional to show you the best way to do that. I will tell you, we've made the decision with our implementation to manage the FECM uses using a standalone table to domain setup, so that the standalone table will drive domains in my space records as for a drop down of what the proper room type should be. We're developing field maps and survey 1, 2, 3 forms for our space survey tool. The one challenge that we ended up deciding not to work through, I mentioned earlier that INSITE tracks our movable assets in their accounting life cycle. Indoors does great at tracking asset location. It's not necessarily an accounting system. And our controller's office really wanted something that could not only track the location of the asset, but do the accounting, what fund paid for it, invoice vouchers, depreciation, on and on and on. So they are looking at moving to a different product for their movable assets. However, Indoors will be the system of record for the space information and will feed the building, facility, and floor data to that system once it's selected.
Jeff, before you move on from this page, I kind of want to jump back to your first point there about the ArcGIS.
Yes.
And just let people know that to implement indoors, you don't necessarily have to have enterprise. You can do it on Arc Enterprise or ArcGIS Online. there are some limitations once you start getting to a very broad systems integration uses. So what Jeff went through with the enterprise and getting that set up, you don't always have to. Keep that in mind. There's a lot you can do, especially if you're looking at the pilot. You can get this implemented on ArcGIS Online without going through all the deep technical. But to his point, there is some benefit if you're looking to expand your GIS or start doing systems integration or start really taking it, you plan on taking it to that high level. Enterprise might be the way to get to, maybe not short term, but eventually. But you can get it going on other through Arc Online initially if you need.
And Chris, to add to your point, URI has an entire geospatial strategy. GIS is our platform for system of record for all spatial data. We were growing this system outside of the need for a new space system. So it made sense for us to have everything in one place and to continue to improve our enterprise instance or our foundation, because we were using it for so many things across the campus. So, I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying, oh, you have to have enterprise. There's lots of ways to do this. I think Chris is even going to speak to some other possibilities. But for us at URI, this is what made sense, and this is the way we move forward.
And as a GIS geek, I fully approve of that geospatial strategy. So
that's a whole other topic of conversation, Chris. So, continuing with the conversation about implementation challenges, the big one is always data migration. And for me, the first real issue, and I've said this a couple of times, was prepping our CAD data. And again, we didn't have CAD data to begin with. We had this INSITE specific software. We had the ability to export the CAD, the INSITE floor plans into AutoCAD, but then there was a lot of work to do in the CAD file to get it ready for indoors, making sure you had the correct layers, making sure the layer naming conventions were set. So this pilot, we picked one very large academic/science building because it had a little bit of every type of space in it. And I focused on that building at least first. And I will say that I did the CAD work manually. It was slow. It was daunting, especially because I am by no means a CAD expert. I was kind of learning as I went. But the reason I went through it is it taught me what I didn't know. In other words, how much work had to be done to our floor plans, what was the scope, how long was it going to take. It really helped me understand the daunting task we were facing. And ultimately, what it helped me do was establish an RFP, a request for proposals, that was very specific, and we got great response. We're in the process of awarding that RFP now. And it really helped me understand and clearly lay out what our expectations were for a third party to come in and finish the conversion of all our floor plan data. Learning how to georeference and scale the CAD files when you brought them into GIS. I mean, that it sounds like a basic process, but there was a lot of trial and error there, especially on the scaling part. There are some challenges to scaling the drawings properly for indoors so that your square footage integrity stays in place. I've actually got some help from Austin Community College in Texas. They were wonderful in helping me figure out some scaling issues. So again, there's an opportunity to reach out to colleagues that can help you out with stuff. What really helped me learn the biggest issue, though, was figuring out annotations. And I have this picture on the left where it's kind of zoomed in on one of my INSITE floor plans. And you can make out, some of the green lettering, which is what we call our space label. And going in order there, you see the floor/room number, you see the room type, you see our department allocation, you see our square footage for the space, and then you see a 4-digit number below that. That 4-digit number is not something that was originally in our floor plans, and it's become, well, Chris, how should I describe it? My magic data key, I guess. for those of you that are familiar with database management, every record in your database gets assigned a unique ID behind the scenes. You may never see it, you may never use it. I got comfortable with those unique IDs working in things like Power BI and using these unique IDs as joins. And using them as joins for different data elements in Power BI gave me an idea. And I was able to work with the INSITE company before they went out of business to run a script in my database that copied those unique IDs into a field I was able to display on my floor plans. So now I can see that unique ID for each space in the space label. When I dump these out into AutoCAD for the third party to finish the conversion process, they're able to take that unique ID and turn it into an annotation in my CAD files. And for those of you that have been through the process or even watched the process in some tutorials, when you ingest CAD floor plans into Indoors, it takes annotations and adds them as fields in your attribute table. So as I ingest my floor plans, every space in my Indoors database, the attribute table is going to contain the unique ID for my INSITE database. Now I have this common element in both systems to work as a join as I start to migrate the other data from INSITE to Indoors, whether that's space attributes, whether that's an office occupant, whether that's a laboratory assignment. The list goes on and on. I now have my unique identifier that can serve as a join to pull data from one system to the other. And that has saved me a ton of manual work. And sorry, I kind of got ahead of myself on that last slide, but that was what I was going to talk about here. That unique identifier being in both systems and being able to connect one system to the other and start sliding over so much of this data. Chris, anything you'd like to add about implementation challenges before I move on here?
No, just to think a little more, about that unique identifier. That I always describe it as a social security number, for you. That's your unique identifier for your person, but what your name is, your address, where you work, that's all separate and can be stored somewhere else. And what Jeff was doing was utilizing that database of INSITE information and connecting it back to the unique identifier. So having the GIS system in the ArcPro, when it does that analysis to capture that annotation and make smart data, you don't have to pull everything across. You can just pull the bare minimum and start linking it to that rich data set that he already had.
So bottom line, and by the way, these are some pictures from my initial pilot project. In terms of cost, licensing cost, I'm reducing my annual licensing cost by about 70%. And I will tell you, compared to other systems out there, INSITE was not expensive, but it pales in comparison to what I'm going to be paying for Indoors going forward. I do want people to be mindful of other implementation costs they could face based on what their GIS infrastructure is, whether it's enterprise, online, or other. Do you have some sort of campus base map to display your floor plans on? What's your data readiness? And, keeping in mind that any improvements you make to your GIS system for Indoors ultimately is going to benefit other GIS initiatives as you develop your GIS program at your organization. And then I just always like to do a shout out here for some of those additional resources. And I think at this point, Chris, you've got some things you'd like to add about Indoors as well.
Yeah. So, but you want to go ahead and cover the rest of these?
Well, yeah. Obviously, number one, Chris is a great resource. I couldn't have gotten my pilot off the ground and completed without him. Your Esri account manager is also super helpful in connecting you with resources. The ArcGIS Indoors website is a great resource. If you're not a member already, join the Esri Smart Campus Operations community. They exchange a lot of great information. And then I'll also put a plug in here for the Campus FM Technology Association. In fact, I think, Chris, that's where you and I met the first time. but they are a wonderful resource for all things facilities management, IT related in higher education. You can find their website just by searching for CFTA. They do a wonderful conference every year. They have a lot of great webinars, so they've been a huge resource for me as well. That's how I met my colleagues at Austin Community College that helped me with the scaling issues with the indoors floor plans.
Yeah. And actually, Deborah is online, so
is she? Hi, Deb.
And I will give an extra plug for CFTA. It's a great organization. It's a kind of a misery loves company type of a setup, and it's very collaborative. The fact that every year you always hear about some institution that goes and visits another one afterwards just to learn what they were doing. So there's a lot of great resources for that. I wanted to add a few things in here too about some extra things to think about. When you're thinking about getting this going on your side, Jeff had a great system already in place. Had INSITE, and if it wasn't clear, had a great set of data behind it, a great set of information in that database. The space was good, but it wasn't ready and prepared for ArcPro, but that was just a conversion thing. But it was already drawn, it was already kind of annotated, it had the information already there. So it had already been centralized and put together. Most organizations that I've dealt with and have seen don't have that central data set of floor plans. So that's where one of your initial challenges is going to be, is taking all those rolled up paper plans, old CAD files with red line markups, whatever you need, and putting an initial data set together. You don't necessarily have to do it in CAD, but that's going to be another data sources to consume that. But oftentimes, even if there is something there, it's probably grossly out of date because it's not been maintained. So that's something to think about, is that initial data creation or conversion, just to get those floor plan data set built initially. The next step after that is validating the data. Jeff and URI were maintaining that information so it was current. If you don't have that data or it's lapsed, I would say if you don't keep up with it, it's out of date tomorrow. So oftentimes what needs to be done is actually validating that space. And oftentimes that means going room to room to check, what is the room number? What is the occupancy? Does the shape match what we think it is? You can get precise with scanning and all, but oftentimes just opening a door, walking in, yeah, this room looks like what the CAD file says it is, and the next 6 rooms are all the same shape, we're good. But you know what? It's not an office anymore. They converted it to a classroom. That's where you need to start validating that information. So this is an extra little effort, is the data conversion and the validation, that may be extra time and effort on your end to create that pilot project or even the bigger implementation. The other thing to think about is what Jeff showed here was great space management system using Indoors. I want to just kind of comment in here that a lot of people have a kind of a misunderstanding that they almost think of anything done inside a building has to be done with ArcGIS Indoors. And that's not true. There is a lot you can do with ArcGIS Online. And I showed a little video here and play it again for documenting your space, being able to investigate it, start finding your square footage and things like that. So if you're starting to look at just starting the tip of the iceberg, there's a lot of data prep and a lot of things you can do, even a lower barrier of entry, to get started on this. So keep in mind that there's ArcGIS Online, which again, most institutions, especially higher ed, already own, but may not have always implemented to get started on this. So there are options on this. And I think that big demarcation of when you need to start thinking indoors, the two I often talk about are, if you're going to start talking about routing and wayfinding, the room-to-room navigation, if you're going to start doing tracking of people and flow and data usage, of a particular room or things like that, the blue dot tracking. If you're going to start integrating this into other systems, start tying it into a larger space management system, or start doing what Jeff is doing here and migrating one space management system over into Indoors and start utilizing its full capabilities. to really analyze that. Those are kind of that demarcation of when really is a good time to start thinking about indoors. I don't want to dissuade you from going indoors, but there's a lot of people who think that you have to do that instead of, they don't realize there's other options to get you really far on this. And the nice thing is, just even by going with the ArcGIS Online, you're prepping your data, you're getting it cleaned up, you're validating it, you're getting standards built, you're getting a process in place to keep it up to date, which is huge. So if and when you're ready to move to indoors, it's not as big of a step as if you started from the beginning. So you're still making progress by going through the Arc Online route as well. So off of that, we'll throw it open for discussion. There's been a lot of questions come in, so I'll go through those. The first one I was asking about, is this going to be recorded? Absolutely. And that's probably the third time I've been asked just today alone. That's a very hot topic. So this will be recorded. I'll get it posted to the Paratum YouTube channel. I'll get that disseminated out as well. But feel free to share that to whomever you want, maybe internal management, or start having discussions off of that. Okay, here's one. Can Indoors provide wayfinding service for campus visitors, both home and on-site? Absolutely. And that's one of the big powers, is that room-to-room navigation. Not only, door to door from outside the campus, but how do you get somebody into a campus or into a room? There's also options to turn on ADA walking. If they need to avoid a stairs and take the elevator, okay, they'll route them a different way, or use a different ramp to get in a door. So you can have all those restrictions on there.
Chris.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I just want to jump in on one thing related to that, though. Indoors has a geoprocessing tool that will establish that network inside the buildings.
Yes.
Outside the buildings, you're going to have your GIS staff build that network across your campus from building to building. I just want to make that distinction, that Indoors makes it very easy to build that indoor network. You're still looking at traditional GIS routing methods to build that outdoor network.
Absolutely.
And that is something we are still looking at tackling ourselves right now.
Yeah. And kind of that second part, is it accessible for visitors? Yes, it can be open to anybody, whether you're on site or off. There's a kiosk mode of Indoors that you can put a kiosk at certain buildings or locations and have them navigate to wherever they need to go. Next question from Doug. How much progress did you make just using the basic ArcGIS Pro extension license? Jeff, you want to handle that one?
Well, so I ended up getting, let's see, through 2 buildings so that I could show somebody how you switch from building to building when the decision was fully made to actually go with the full-blown implementation. So, 2 buildings out of 320 doesn't sound like a lot, but it was more than enough to get the decision makers at our organization to say, yep, Jeff's onto something here. This is the way we want to go. What do you need from us? So we quickly pivoted from that simple 2-building pilot to starting our full-blown implementation, which is ongoing now. And I will tell you, I think I'd be much farther along if it weren't for my floor plan issue. I had to go through the RFP process. We had to select a vendor. That's still on. It's about to wrap up, and we can get somebody going. And it's not that, I could have converted all the floor plans myself, but we have nearly 800 floor plans altogether. It would just slow down the implementation. I anticipate, so I will tell you, just the other day, our enterprise geo database has been established. We've run the geoprocessing tool and have our Indoors data set, our data model established. We have set up our ArcPro projects to work with our branch versioned enterprise geo database. We are starting to add the data elements such as the standalone tables for the FICA manual, the department list. We're getting feeds for our people information, so that as soon as I get the first set of floor plans, that building can go up immediately, and we can just start banging out buildings as we get the floor plans back. So we're moving along quickly. The pilot kind of just stopped because I had my proof of concept, and it was like, yep, go full bore with the implementation. But I still returned to that pilot project. I mentioned working with it to figure out how to work out field maps and data collection. I was able to test that out and show proof of concept with field maps by using my pilot project to connect to field maps. It's really it's been such a valuable experience, and it's still teaching me things, even though our implementation is underway.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add to that too, to kind of dive into that. So the basic extension, Jeff said he did 2 buildings. You can do 200.
Yes.
That basic extension is not limited to how many buildings or square footage or number of rooms. So that is full data conversion. So there's no limit on that. When and Jeff, if you want to kind of briefly touch on this, because we got several other questions about beyond that. So you can take that, you can deploy that, you can show people that and utilizing it. It's when you want to take that to the next step is when you start talking the other extensions or other add-ons. You want to touch on
Yeah,
that?
I actually published my pilot project on our URI Enterprise portal and shared it with others so they could start interacting with the buildings and thinking about how they would like to use this system once it's up and running. That's why we were asked to test out the field maps data collection feature.
But if you want to deploy it to the routing capabilities, to the full campus, start doing the deep spatial add-on, that's where the other add-ons come into play. But to
Correct.
the question, you can do pretty much the whole campus and publish it with that extension. We got a question here. How are you integrating those efforts with your campus facility operations and planning construction teams? There appears to be a great opportunity for collaboration. I think this is your discussion about coordinating your space and your GIS teams.
Yeah, and that really comes back to having a geospatial strategy in place. I actually have a document that lays that all out, and I'll give you one example. We are in the process, we just got underway. We are starting a full-blown facilities condition assessment. We hired a third-party company that specializes in asset management to come in and assess the facilities. They're doing all of that based on uniformat standards, but all of the data is being turned over to me in a way where I can ingest it into the GIS system when it's fully up and running. So it's going to be the home for our entire university-wide facilities condition index project. We're doing a sidewalk analysis. We actually had to develop a kind of a one-page handout that says, hey, here are our GIS data standards, so that as our facilities groups were going out for different projects, they could say, we want the data turned over in GIS format, and here's our baseline standards for how that GIS data should be organized. So it's already paying dividends, and they're talking to me in advance so that I can make sure these third parties are using our building identifiers and space identifiers, so that it's going to be easy to connect this data as I pull it into the system when it's up and running. So that is an ongoing discussion every day with every new project.
Yeah, and that, I think what we talked about earlier about being able to put this on Arc Online or even this data that you built, that allows that conversation and start getting traction amongst these different teams. I oftentimes say that people don't get it until they see it. So putting that floor plan online or showing your campus base maps on there, and then letting somebody go, great, can you now show me the ADA accessible ramps and their issues with that, and let that traction. So you're right, it's a great opportunity for collaboration, but you got to sometimes show them some basic information first. Next question here, and I think you kind of just answered this. Are you using CAD or BIM data to update, maintain your floor plans moving forward, or is everything contained within ArcGIS Indoors?
So we have made the decision to maintain our floor plans in CAD. I know that ArcGIS now does not require CAD data. You can maintain them fully within ArcGIS, but we still have lots of design staff on our team, lots of third-party architects we work with, and the ability for them to access CAD data has been a real stumbling block for us over the years. So we were looking for ways to get to CAD even before we started with this Indoors transition, but we will maintain in CAD, and then we're excited about the possibility of BIM. I will tell you, our university has paid for 2 BIM models so far in construction projects, and the data has never been turned over to us because nobody knows what to do with it. So I'm working on changing that with my progress here with ArcGIS and Indoors, and migrating towards CAD and BIM data.
Yeah, BIM is one that I've not really dealt with an end user dealing with the operations and maintenance side of the house that know what to do with BIM. They get it and then they go, but there's nobody to maintain it, and it's a whole headache. So
and that's what's beautiful about Indoors. It's ready to actually ingest that BIM data and allow people to interact with it.
Okay, next one was, how long did you simultaneously use your legacy management system and
Oh,
indoor?
I'm sorry, I still am. I'm in the middle of an implementation right now. I anticipate my full implementation proof of concept stage. Well, I don't even want to call it proof of concept. I will have it running for my space inventory purposes by the end of this fiscal year, which for us is June 30th. We are still running the legacy system right now because it's still the what would you call it? The production system of record. By the end of the calendar year at the latest, I will have that legacy system shut off and we will be completely in indoors. It would have happened quicker, but as I've said, I'm dealing with this kind of unique CAD issue of getting my floor plans converted from that INSITE software over to CAD.
Perfect. Next one is, how did the user's adoption of indoors go? Or did you deploy the mobile version?
We will be deploying the mobile. So I want to be clear. I haven't finished my implementation yet. We are well on the way, but I have already got people lining up, asking for demonstrations, thinking about how they're going to add on stuff they need into the indoors model. In fact, my biggest problem right now is managing expectations, not only in terms of timeline of finishing the implementation, but I got to worry about managing my space inventory first and foremost. Once I am fully confident that that's working right, then we can start adding on all these additional features like asset tracking, integrating with work order management systems. You know, where are AEDs, the routing and the networking. My first responsibility is maintaining that space inventory according to FECM code. And if I can't do that, the other stuff is pointless, truthfully, because I have to worry about that information for our indirect cost rate negotiations with the federal government.
All right, I'm going to combine 3 questions here, 2 of which are asking about, can indoors handle research, lab occupancy and activity? Basically, that's kind of more also, were you already tracking that from your space management side of it?
Yep.
And then tying into that, does indoors link to ERP software for things like employee address info or things like that?
Absolutely. Both and both of those are in process. I will tell you what I'm working on. The lab assignments will work just like the office assignments. I'm talking with Esri now because what I'm not sure about yet, and I'm trying to make the right decision, is do I want those contained within the same feature layer within the indoors data model, or do I want to separate them? I'm leaning towards a separate feature layer for lab management so that it's easier to kind of lock people out of if I feel the need to, because we might be more willing to share information on office occupants than we do or will want to regarding lab assignments. And when I say I'm bringing in the people data from our system of record, it's employee ID, it's first and last name, it's department title, email address, phone number. In fact, we're looking that when the viewer goes online for indoors, which by the way comes with 25,000 licenses, so everybody at my university can have access to this. It will also replace things like our god awful web-based department directory listing.
Perfect. And that's where some of the other usage is scheduling, and you'll see Esri demo about that, about scheduling and coordinating and getting IT people out to find the local support staff to come help you.
Yep.
Zach, question here from Zach, and I'm going to go ahead and answer this. I think is they said that they're looking to have their organization is looking at forecasting interior assets for replacement costs, replacement cycles, things like that. And he asks, is Indoors suitable for that? Reality, Arc Indoors is not a asset management system for the forecasting inside of it. That aspect, that's where you really do need a true asset management system. However, those 2 systems can be connected, so then you can start to visualize in your GIS system or in the indoor system those assets, and then start representing that data that's forecasted visually. Jeff mentioned earlier about kind of a building condition assessment. Well, that's one thing that it can be stored in there once that analysis has been done, is storing and representing in your GIS system condition assessments of buildings, of assets, and things like that. But the true forecasting should be done kind of in an asset management system. The last one here, where was it? Who has access to view the data? Who are you sharing it with right now? What's your plan with that?
So initial access is our entire facilities group team, and that covers the assistant vice president of facilities, our planning office, planning and real estate development, capital projects, small projects, facilities operations. It also includes the entire public safety team. And then right now, anybody that our vice president of administration and finance wants to get early access to it. The long-term plan, once we have it to a point where it can benefit the campus community, and I mean the routing, the directory information, it's going to be viewable by anybody with a URI single sign-on account, okay? Meaning, you know, URI staff, students, but what we're working through with public safety is, are there some spaces that we essentially don't want to give them information on? That's not to say you'll see the room on the floor plan, but it may not tell you what type of room it is. It may not tell you who's assigned to it. We're trying to work through how do we balance the need for wayfinding and knowledge of the physical makeup of campus with safety of the campus community. And that is always going to be an ongoing discussion that we'll have to work through before we really open it up.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour. We've got some more questions, but unfortunately, not going to have time to get those. This is contact information for Jeff and myself. Feel free to reach out to either one of us. I know Jeff has gotten a lot of help from other folks and has offered his help to others. So feel free to reach out. And I know he's willing to discuss this at length because we have.
Yes. I'm happy to talk with anybody. Reach out. You can also find me on LinkedIn or through the CFTA website as well.
Perfect. Well, everyone, I appreciate you joining. We had a great attendance today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.